Well, welcome everyone to the 5th episode of Season 4 of the Northern Spin podcast, brought to you in association with FI Real Estate Management. Now we're shaking things up today, hence I'm speaking first, but we've had suggestions that myself and Michael have got too cosy, so strap yourself in and pin back your ears. It's going to be one hell of a ride. I'm Chris Maguire, Executive Editor of Business Cloud and Tech Blast. Michael calls me the happy, clappy Chris from Chorley, the banter king of Kent, but I'm just passionate about being a force for good. My co-host is a fellow journalist and Politico, Michael Taylor. He loves Labour, especially his chums, Andy Burnham, Angela Rayner and Jonathan Reynolds. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Chris. That's quite a barb. You're saying it like it's a gotcha, yeah? A revelation. And I thought you asked me to do this podcast with you precisely because of my proximity to Angela, Andy and Jonathan, or Johnny as we call him. Yeah?
Yeah,
and now you're saying it like it's a bad thing.
No, it's not a
like
bad
guilt
thing.
By association.
Far from it, Michael.
Yeah.
Far from it. You're being too defensive.
No, I'm not. No. I put my cards on the table. I literally intended to put my cards on the table, my Labour Party membership card, my Community Union membership card, and most importantly of all at the moment, my Society of Editors membership card. I am indeed, as you say, a working journalist. I believe in things that are consistent with my values. I think politics is important because it's about people making change for the better. It's not a punchline. It's not Punch and Judy. It's real life.
Couldn't agree with you more.
So you've got off to a bad start already, Chris, because you were meant to be like coming in, fist flying, windmilling in, knocking me out.
No, the point is though, is that you're Labour to your bones.
No, I'm not.
No, whereas
Chris, I literally left the Labour Party because of my principles for a good few years.
See, but I'm not conservative to my core. I'm not, I'm not. And that's the thing is that when we review the podcast, it's hard to defend the Conservatives at the moment. But today, Michael,
you're going to have a go.
We're going to switch.
Good old Rishi.
Not so much defending the Conservatives, but basically putting some scrutiny on the Labour Party. We're going to start off. Gavin Davis.
Here, used to work for the Daily Mail, full disclosure.
Yeah, okay. I've never lied. Gavin Davis has become the 7th Labour MP to be suspended in the current Parliament after serious allegations were made against him. So we'll be asking, what's happening at the heart of the Labour Party? Keir Starmer is also coming under pressure after it was revealed Labour have accepted £1.5 million from Dale Vince. Dale Vince, of course, is a major funder of the campaign Just Stop Oil. And finally, the Mayor of the North of Tyne, Jamie Driscoll, an acknowledged socialist, has been barred from standing as the North East Mayor, paving the way for Kim McGuinness to win it. Clearly a political decision from Keir Starmer, and I noticed she had a manifesto launched at the weekend as well. And, the local mayors, Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham, have come to the defence of their mate, Jamie Driscoll.
Well, I look forward to debating all of that with you, people. We've got a great show for you today. We'll also be talking about a devolution row in Lancashire. We'll be talking clean air zones and an amusing story about a Twitter account called The Secret Tory, which I can confirm doesn't belong to Chris. Time, though, for a quick thank you. We simply couldn't do this podcast without the support and drive of our colleagues at What Media, who expertly produce this podcast every week. They're the kings of video content creation, and they turn our weekly ramblings into the hit weekly podcast and YouTube show that is Northern Spin. They really do make us feel part of the team, and a big, big thanks to Ellis and Charlie for doing their duties this week. And on that, we're going to go to our first interval.
FI Real Estate Management is not just your traditional property company. Founded in 1982 and managing assets totaling more than $1 billion, FI Real Estate Management pride themselves on going on the journey with their tenants. FI Real Estate Management, the property company with personality. Just like us, Michael.
Indeed, Chris. So we've got some exciting plans for Season 4 of the Northern Spin podcast. If you want to join FI Real Estate Management to sponsor the show and reach a growing audience, then please get in touch with Chris or I or our friends at What Media. So, Chris, lowercase c Conservative, tell us why it's been a bad week for Labour.
You know what, Michael? I'd love to attach electrodes to your body today because I think will you react to what I'm about to say? And I think you will. But we'll see, Michael. We'll see whether you can rise above it.
I'll take it all in my stride.
Well, we'll see, won't we? Last week, Geraint Davis had the whip removed by the Labour Party after reports of, and I quote, incredibly serious allegations of completely unacceptable behaviour were levelled against him. Now, when you talk about the word insight, I have no insight, and maybe I'll just leave it there, Michael. I have no insight into this allegation, and he's innocent until proven guilty, but he's currently one of 7 MPs who've had the whip removed from him by the Labour Party in this Parliament. It would be 8, but Neil Coyle was readmitted back into the Parliamentary Labour Party, I think last week, following allegations he made racist comments to a British-Chinese journalist, among other allegations. Now, just to be balanced, the Conservatives have removed the whip from 6 of their MPs, while Plaid Cymru and the SNP have removed the whip from 1 each of their MPs as well. But this is a focus on Labour. Now, feel free to interrupt if you want, but I'm going to run through the list of Labour MPs who've had the whip removed, and I'm going to explain why they've had the whip removed. If you know the answer, tell me. Number 1, Diane Abbott. Okay.
Are you asking me?
Well, do you know the answer?
Yeah, I do. She wrote a letter to the Observer newspaper and said it was an early draft in which she said that ginger people face the same kind of racism as Jewish people. Spot
on. Nick Brown, veteran MP, he had the whip removed from him.
He was the chief whip under Gordon Brown.
Yeah, the Newcastle upon Tyne East MP, he had the whip removed from him September 22 after an unspecified complaint was brought against him. Conor McGinn, he's the MP, for a local MP actually, St Helens North, he had the whip suspended in December 2022 following an unspecified complaint. I'm not going to ask you for the reasons if they're unspecified. Christina Rees, she's the Neath MP, she had the whip removed from her. Do you know why?
Apparently she was accused of bullying her staff.
Absolutely. Jeremy Corbyn, we all know why he had the whip removed from him.
Well, we don't. You tell me.
Actually, it's a good point, actually. A lot of people think it's to do with, his views on anti-Semitism. But the real reason is probably the fact that Keir Starmer wants to put some blue sky between him and Jeremy Corbyn. And that's how I read it. Is that how you read it?
No, technically, the reason was Jeremy Corbyn refused to accept the Equalities and Human Rights Commission report into the Labour Party, which found that under his leadership was institutionally racist. And he said instances of anti-Semitism had been exaggerated for political effect.
Absolutely.
And he rather stubbornly refused to budge on that point. I mean, he could do it at any point, but he's chosen not to do so.
But even if he did, they wouldn't reinstate the whip. Claudia Webb, she had the whip removed September 2020. That's like 3 years ago, nearly. After Webb was charged with harassment of a woman who was having an affair with her then partner, made very unpalatable headlines.
I think he might be exaggerating the extent of her partner's friendship with the woman involved.
Well, that was certainly as it was reported. But would we invite Claudia Webb onto the podcast? I'm not sure. So just to repeat, for the sake of balance, the Conservatives, 6 Conservative MPs have had the whip removed, including Blackpool South MP Scott Benton, after he was the subject of a newspaper sting. Now, are you concerned by all these negativity around the Labour Party, Michael?
Well, just to put some further context into it, there have been 3, count them all, 3 by-elections at which Conservative MPs have actually had to resign, which is a far more serious issue. There was obviously Owen Paterson. There was the guy in Wakefield, which forced a by-election. There was another. There's been others. There was a guy in Somerset who was watching tractor porn in the House of Commons. So, we're not having an arms race and a leaderboard on parliamentary sleaze here. But, in the full interests of getting the facts right, I think the Tories are nudging ahead on that one, even though they've got more MPs to draw from.
Yeah, and I don't think we're trying to have a contest in that respect. And the Conservatives have got about 350 MPs, Labour circa 200. But they've both had more MPs suspended than most people might think. That was the point I was trying to make.
So here's the thing, Chris. So you've lined all these things up because you got some pushback that this podcast was becoming too pro-Labour because you found it increasingly difficult from your, sensible middle ground, conservative, generally tend to be conservative political stance, that you think we've been a bit soft on Labour. So you're overblowing and overdoing it with all this series of gotchas, which you're trying to mug me on. So let me help you out. There are 2 different things going on here with these 6 pieces of evidence that you've put in front of me. Some of them are down to personal behaviour, which you know more about them than I do, right? So obviously, none of us are going to defend sexual harassment, bullying, or any of those things in the workplace, right? Let me give you a little bit of insight, though, on the selection of Claudia Webb to be the MP for Leicester prior to 2019. She was a staff member of Ken Livingstone's team when he was mayor, so it's pretty clear where her politics lie. She's a councillor in Islington, a London borough, and she's well known on the far left in the Labour Party. So just as you're going to attempt to do a look at Labour with Jamie Driscoll, the problem with Labour under the previous leadership of two other people you mentioned, Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, and of course John McDonnell, is they prioritised ideology and allyship of the left over the suitability and competence of candidates to become candidates for the Labour Party. Frankly, Claudia Webb was always a disaster waiting to happen. Now, for me, you can say I'm Labour to my bones and all of those things, but for me, the problem with this country is that there are two main political parties, when in reality, there should be about 6. And the far left should really be under a different party led by Jeremy Corbyn. Call it peace and justice, call it whatever you want. The Ken Loach Trade Union Socialist Militant Party, whatever you want. But frankly, off you trot, magic grandpa. Many of those people indeed were in a different political party prior to Jeremy Corbyn taking the leadership in 2015. 3-pound trots who flooded into a protest movement, not a serious party of government. So for all these dull exterior, Keir Starmer is actually strategic and ruthless, and he's raised the bar of quality so he can find a mix of professional and capable people to fill senior cabinet roles, so Labour can fulfil its mission, which is on the back of our membership cards, which is to represent people in Parliament to achieve greater change. So you try and portray me as an unthinking Labour cheerleader, but I'm remarkably untribal actually when it comes down to it. And as I said before, I've spent time outside the Labour Party because of those core principles.
See, I've never portrayed you as an unthinking Labour cheerleader because you are thinking.
Let's just look at the first page of the script. My co-host is Labour to his bones.
Yeah.
I'm not.
No, but I think fundamentally you are Labour.
For the purposes of this podcast, I'm a left-leaning, I think lots of different things about lots of different subjects. And the purpose of us doing a politics podcast is to try and provide insight.
Yeah, I agree. But I don't think you're an unthinking Labour cheerleader. I don't. What I do think is I think that when I put the other view forward, you get defensive. Now, that's just my view. I also think...
No, Chris, this is how it works. You put an argument to me, I respond. If that's being defensive, that's being defensive. I'm merely responding to and providing some context and some insight into the issues that you raise.
I also think Labour in opposition don't get the same level of scrutiny as the government. Inevitably, it'd be the same if the roles were reversed. I mentioned earlier, Labour's got 200 MPs. The whip's been removed from 7 of them. I think that's worthy of discussion. And I'm not alone. Charlotte Nichols, Labour MP for Warrington North, accused her own party of choosing not to act, her words, on allegations of sexual misconduct by its MPs. Maybe we should say alleged sexual misconduct by its MPs. Nicholl told BBC Radio 4's World at One that there was a, quote, underlying absolutely rotten culture at Westminster around sexual harassment. She said the party had been shamed into taking action against Geraint Davis, who denied any wrongdoing. The Spectator's headline, which I read, was, "When will Pestminster end?" Now, it doesn't matter which party you're aligned to, it doesn't look good. That's my point.
No, it doesn't. Politics attracts a certain type of personality, sadly. And a lot of the stuff I've done over the years has been, I'm not being defensive when I say this. I do find the whole Westminster system pretty rotten. We'll talk about it later on with this new movement that Gordon Brown's launched and the statement that some of our metro mayors have signed up to. But just as the business world has its Me Too moments, so too does politics. So come on, what you got? You said you were going to drive through the gears and put the boxing gloves on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm holding your feet to the fire today, Michael. I'd like to talk to you about an entrepreneur called Dale Vince. Incidentally, And the older I get, the more I admire men's hair. I do. As my hair starts to thin, Dale Vince has got great hair. He's the founder of green energy firm Ecotricity. He's the chairman of Forest Green Rovers. He's donated $1.5 million to the Labour Party over the last 10 years. He's also a donor of the protest group Just Stop Oil. I read a piece today that he's increased his donation. I think he's up the ante to about £340,000. Now, obviously, Just Stop Oil, their direct actions targeted everyone from commuters to sporting events. Their, orange paint and orange flares and stuff are getting all sorts of headlines. Not surprisingly, the Daily Mail and the Conservatives have jumped all over it. They're saying that Labour shouldn't be taking this money from Dale Vince. Are you worried about how it looks?
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of risk for Labour that the more that the right, the thick right in particular, and the Daily Mail specifically, crank up the pressure on Dale Vince, and they're trying to portray him as some kind of terrorist, that it will become a distraction and an issue because they haven't got anything else. They can't defend the government's record. So they're constantly trying to find other ways to and other accusations to pin on the Labour Party. So yeah, I am concerned that that's being weaponised as an issue. But in reality, I quite like Dale Vince. I mean, not just because of his hair. I used to have a policy when I was the editor of a magazine, never really to justify putting people on the front page as a cover shot, because we're not, Elle or GQ or anything like that. They couldn't justify it. But in the Southwest, we did sign off to put Dale Vince on the front cover with his dreadlocks and with a big windmill in the background because I thought he looked great. I genuinely think he's an interesting character and people like him have their place in public life, and who he decides to donate his money to is his thing. I don't particularly agree with the tactics of Just Stop Oil. What do you think?
No, actually,
the kids sort of relate to it a bit.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't agree with the tactics, but he did a really good interview. He went on the front foot. Right. He did an interview, I think, on the News Agents podcast, and he said, I'm getting all this stick from the right wing. I'm going to get more. I just want to put my side of the story forward. And actually, Just Stop Oil put a spokesperson on recently, and it's like they've had an epiphany, and they've realised they can't have real militant voices because they don't work. And this lady came on and she said, look, people said the same thing about the suffragettes all those years ago. Mm. So I understand where Just Stop Oil come from. I think they are losing the narrative, but I can't criticize the sentiment because we're living in a world where the temperature and the climate is going to pot.
So just to come back to the point then, so it was, are Labour vulnerable on this issue? I think there's a really easy retort to it. And I don't think you're presenting this as a gotcha. I think you'd like to set it up as being a bit of a collision and you want me to get on the back foot and get all really defensive. But seriously, I could just quote a series from the Tories' own rogues gallery. Lyubov Chernukin, married to Putin's former finance minister, 2 million quid to the Tory party. Dimitri Luce, Mohammed Emersi Mohammed, a corrupt telecoms chief, a cheeky $500,000 to the Tory party, and the whole history of dark money being put into right-wing think tanks and the Tory party, and the whole stuff around funding of where it came for the Brexit campaign. I'm really surprised the Tories and the Daily Mail are going there, to be honest with you.
What I will say is...
And here's an extra for this story. Yeah. The guy who founded Autoglass, who's decided he's not going to give his kids any of his fortune, he's donated $500,000 quid to the Labour Party. He wants a Labour government. I
read a story today. I didn't actually, just clicked on the headline and it said entrepreneur to give £5 million to Labour.
That's him.
That's him. £5 million quid. Incredible. Yeah. I think there's this conversation taking place at Conservative Central Office, which is basically saying at the moment, okay, what are our attack lines to go against Labour? And one of them is going to be the environment. They're going to say that they're talking about North Sea oil. They're talking about, and Keir Starmer's coming under pressure about their policy as regards to the whole green agenda. And they're talking about the fact, will the energy supply, be fractured because of Keir Starmer? So clearly the agenda, the green agenda is going to be part and parcel of what the Conservatives are going to attack Labour for. And I I'm like you. I actually quite like Dale Vince. I think entrepreneurs who stand by, who've got the courage to stand by their convictions, should be applauded. But
so come on, let's move on. Let's talk about Jamie Driscoll, because this has become a really live issue.
This is a big story. This is a huge story. Right, okay. So Jamie Driscoll, the mayor for North of Tyne, acknowledged socialists, being barred from standing as the North East mayor, opening the way for Kim McGuinness to win. Clearly, it's a political decision. Conservative MP Simon 7 Weeks Clark described the decision as baffling, and I wonder if he kept a straight face when he said it. John McDonnell, the MP, fellow Corbynites, described it as staggering news. Now, this has got Keir Starmer written all over it because he's clearly controlling Labour's selection lists. It reminds me very much of the decision that we've spoken about in this pod, I think in the last season, which was when they left the chair of the Labour Northwest off the long list, Lee Burnham, in Bolton North East. Now, is there a place for socialist politicians in Labour? And I'm going to broaden it out slightly. Why is this so significant, Michael, in terms of what's happening in the Labour Party? Why is the decision to basically kick Jamie Driscoll into the long grass so significant for the Labour Party? Now, Michael's taking it so seriously.
I'm taking it so seriously. I have a prop here for you, Chris. So
he's got his huge wallet.
You're asking about socialists in the Labour Party. This is my Labour Party membership card, kids.
Okay.
And it says on the back of it, the first line, the Labour Party is a democratic socialist party, right? It was formed in order to represent people in Parliament and other government bodies, right? That's what the Labour Party exists to do. It's not a protest movement, yeah? It's not to go on marches. It's not to stand on picket lines, although they are subsidiary to that ultimate purpose. But the Labour Party is a democratic socialist party. So no, I think that's, for a start, that's nonsense. But let me just, if I can, picture the scene for you a few years from now. A Geordie Combined Authority, whatever it's going to be called, the Geordie Nation, something like that.
Yeah.
You've got the King of the North East in situ, maybe Jamie Driscoll. Does the Labour Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, really want a noisy clash with a left-wing mayor, while he's the Labour Prime Minister? The other problem with Jamie Driscoll is he's very happy to make his excuses to you, as I know you spoke to him at the Convention of the North earlier this year, about his suitability, and brandish that, he's created all these jobs and he's a sensible Labour politician. But the far left mask slips far too often. He shared a stage, and this is the crux issue about why I think he's been excluded from the long list to be Labour's candidate for the new North East Combined Authority. He shared a stage with the film director Ken Loach, and Loach has consistently upset Jewish people with his comments that aren't compatible with Starmer's intention to rip out anti-Semitism by its roots. It was the first thing he said when he was elected leader. So if the candidate was for a parliamentary selection, and I think this is the thought process that the Labour NEC and Keir Starmer's office have done, is if Jamie Driscoll was standing for a Labour nomination for, I don't know, Hazel Grove to be the Labour candidate, would his previous behaviours have excluded him? Now, they did, as you said, for Lee Brennan in Bolton North East and various other people who would identify with that wing of the Labour Party. And the statement from the party was the party holds its candidates to a very high standard. During this process, some applicants did not meet the threshold required to proceed.
I read a piece by Helen Pidd in The Guardian today in which she described Jamie Driscoll as the last Corbynista in power. But
that's fair.
Well, basically say anyone linked to Jeremy Corbyn. And
he chaired Jeremy Corbyn's leadership campaign.
Yeah, I mean, they've obviously, but I asked him about the fact that he was a socialist, and he said, I've got values, but look at what I've achieved. I mean, created nearly 5,000 jobs. And I sort of
dispute that, but yeah.
But his decision to share the stage with Ken Loach was naive at best. What I thought was quite interesting over the weekend, I mentioned it earlier, Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham, both written to the NEC, the National Executive, asking for him to be allowed to appeal, for Jamie Driscoll to be allowed to appeal. Unite have said it's wrong. I don't think they're going to get anywhere. Your mate, Johnny Reynolds, he came out of the weekend. They're not saying too much, but they're saying just enough to hint at what you've mentioned about it's to do with Ken Loach. Going to move it on. I mentioned Charlotte Nichols earlier. Warrington North MP.
You met her, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. She's to the left of the party. She issued a statement earlier last week, actually. It followed a controversial tweet that she posted over the weekend. So many music festivals taking place in our region, so many concerts as well.
Yeah.
She attended the Neighbourhood Weekend Music Festival. I wasn't there, actually. I couldn't make it. The MP witnessed chants of, as you know, don't like to swear, but FUCK, the Tories.
Yeah.
The
Tories.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Do you know what song that's from?
Well,
got a brand new Pig Bag by Pig Bag, but anyway, carry on.
You know I don't.
No.
So that was during the set of somebody called Jamie Webster, who incidentally I've never heard of either. So she tweeted, big chance of FUCK the Tories for Jamie Webster at this Neighbourhood Weekend Music Festival.
Yeah.
And I can't lie, I absolutely love to see it. Love you, Warrington. So that is what the Warrington North MP, Charlotte Nichols, tweeted. Full disclosure, any regulars of the show know that I don't like swearing as well. That's not the language of a festival goer. That's the language of an MP. Surely that can't be right, Michael. Even you've got to admit that.
So I consulted two of our younger viewers. Hi there, Louis and Adam. And the exact phrase when I put the whole circumstances of this to me was, no, not that scouse gimp. Right. So that tune, Chris, right, you mentioned there's lots of festivals, lots of gatherings of young people. That tune and that chant is a feature at many festivals and gigs, including the Neighbourhood Weekender in Warrington at the weekend. The kids, right, hate the Tories, especially the Scouse kids, right, that this artiste is particularly keen to encourage. So she's hardly going to ask them to stop, is she? And it is on her patch. But
doesn't need to tweet it though, does she, Michael?
That's up to her. It's up to her. I wouldn't do it, but you know.
Now you're going to turn it on me now, aren't you? You're going to try and get me with a gotcha.
Why would I try and do that? Yeah. You know, your job's difficult enough trying to defend the Conservative government and their record. But you have asked me lots of questions about Labour, and I think we established long ago, to be fair, Chris, that you're no kind of Tory, really. So I don't expect you to defend Boris Johnson, but let's look at what's been going on since Johnson announced that he's handing over the unredacted WhatsApp messages. Yeah, right, taps nose. Do you seriously think that Boris Johnson doesn't have more than one phone where he texts all these mistresses and various other mates and donors and all those sorts of people? I just don't believe it myself. But he is apparently, dating back to May 2021, sending those messages to the COVID inquiry, bypassing the government, which has refused to hand them over. He's playing games. He's, to quote a phrase, on manoeuvres. Now, last week we called out Johnson for being on manoeuvres, right? So there's clearly a bigger play going on. What do you reckon?
Well, I was just talking before you arrived, actually, and we mentioned Boris Johnson, and we're all of the same view. I mean, he is. Pinocchio could sue him if you accused him of being like Pinocchio. He thinks he's being stitched up by Rishi Sunak in a cabinet office. So he's trying to put the ball back in Rishi Sunak's court. Now, if Johnson was so magnanimous, which is what he's trying to do, and it was actually quite interesting, when he landed on his latest trip to the US and his media entourage tried to prevent a journalist asking him a question, he said, no, come on. And he gave a quote. He wants to use the media, which he does, to be fair, quite effectively. If he was being so magnanimous, why did he wait to the last minute to announce he was handing over his WhatsApp messages to the head of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett? I mentioned before, I covered a murder case over 20 years ago, just to show my age, and Baroness Hallett, Heather Hallett, she was the judge. She is phenomenal. She's
really impressive by all accounts, isn't she?
She's going to take no messing, especially from Pinocchio Johnson. A couple of things to mention.
But the thing is, Chris, they used to say this about Sue Gray, didn't they? You know, someone of unimpeachable credentials, but they soon turn on them if they don't play to their tune, if it doesn't suit them. They'll
struggle to pin anything on Baroness Hallett. A couple of things to mention. Johnson said he would like to send the messages predating April 2021. Remember, we went into lockdown in March 2020. So,
exactly.
so the unredacted messages he's sending are a year after lockdown started. So, unfortunately, all his other messages are on another phone, which he can no longer access because of safety issues. Apparently, safety concerns were raised over the phone after it was revealed the number had been freely available on the internet for 15 years. Apparently, there was a website actually said, if you want to ring Boris Johnson, here's his mobile number. and it was. So the fact that Johnson's been warned that the public funding that he is outrageously receiving for his legal representation to defend him in this COVID inquiry, the fact the government has said to him that he undermines that and it could be withdrawn if he keeps having a go at the government, tells you everything you need to know about Pinocchio Johnson.
Is that his new name?
Yeah, I think we should call him Pinocchio Johnson.
Right, so you want to ask me about the civil service now?
Yeah, and the point I was going to say is that Boris Johnson thinks that he's being stitched up by Rishi Sunak and the Cabinet Office, and we're hearing more and more again. Simon Case's name's coming up in conversations all the time, that the civil service is getting too powerful. Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Minister, has called civil servants opposed to Brexit the blob, and maybe he was talking about Boris Johnson, maybe he called him the blob, and a succession of MPs and ministers say they've been hampered by the civil service. Do you think the civil service is too powerful?
No, I don't. And I think Michael Gove having a go at the blob, he did this when he was Education Secretary. It's a demeaning, dehumanising phrase. And I think it speaks to the desperation of the Tory party, once again, to work in cahoots with their colleagues in the print media to just denigrate the hardworking behaviours of people in the civil service. I think it demeans them. It should be beneath them. I think someone like Gove doesn't even believe it himself. And, to say that I saw a whole load of commentary on Brexit recently that, somehow it's the blob resisting the opportunity for free ports and all the rest of it. I think it was actually on Ben Houchen's LinkedIn page, which he hasn't managed to block me from yet. But, political commentary likes to focus on the he says, she says of PMQs and the debates going on around laws. And then it sort of stops. But the reality is there is no legislative timetable of any substance, really. The Tories haven't got a vision, a plan for the country beyond their 5 pledges, one of which is stopping the small boats. Another one is something that they don't actually have any control over, which is halving inflation, which, again, they've been really mealy-mouthed about that one. It's not cutting prices of food in supermarkets. It's actually the rate at which food prices and lots of other things are going up, and mortgages and all the rest of it. And Jeremy Hunt, to be fair, is quietly getting on in the background and denying extra spending pledges to government departments so they can make their usual gimmicky statements about levelling up and all the other things that they've failed to deliver on from their 2019 majority. But all I would do, Chris, is I'd say this to you again, is there's a rich seam of material at the moment looking at how politics works. Ian Dunt has got a book out about why the civil service in Westminster doesn't work, why the system is grinding. We talked about the bad behaviour and the toxic culture and the behaviour of MPs and special advisors in Parliament and the culture of sexism. Lisa Nandy's got an excellent book out, which I'm more than happy to give you. Alistair Campbell, who I know you've been in contact with recently, we want to interview him about his book about people getting involved in politics and changing things. I think there's a real appetite for change. So, let's look in those directions rather than, just feeding off this really negative chip agenda that people like Michael Gove should be better than that, really.
Yeah, Rory Stewart on his podcast talks about his relationship with civil servants, and that's quite insightful. There are some
you don't believe this nonsense about the blob any more than Michael Gove does, do you?
No. What I do think though is that there is a danger that the civil service should be seen and not heard, and I think there's the problem. They're becoming a story. Lancashire. I want to talk to you about Lancashire.
Yeah. Come on. So what's been going on?
I was in Asda because I don't shop at these these Waitrose, can't afford to. And I saw a front page of the Lancashire Evening Post, and it was "Don't freeze us out." And there was a picture of Deanna Davison, who is the Levelling Up Minister, and it had been photoshopped outside County Hall in Preston. And I thought to myself, that's interesting. So I read it. So Lancashire's been on an 8-year journey to get devolution powers. I live in Lancashire. Davison's due to head to the Red Rose County later this month, along with a load of Whitehall mandarins to discuss it. Now, on the table is a plan to create a combined...
Can I just stop you there? That is pure local newspaper journalism in action. Yeah?
Yeah.
Whitehall mandarins head for the Red Rose County.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I might have inserted Red Rose County
It's good,
bit,
I like
but
it.
they use the word mandarins.
Yes.
So on the table, there's this plan. It's called a combined county authority, and it's basically a fudge because, unfortunately, Lancashire doesn't want the same sort of devolution deal that we've got in Manchester and Liverpool, mainly because they don't want an elected mayor because they could never agree on the right or the same person. So under government rules, only so-called top-tier councils can be members of a combined county authority. So in Lancashire case, that would be the unitary authorities, that would be the county council and Blackpool, and then Blackpool with Darwin. So that's 3 councils.
Blackburn with Darwin.
Absolutely. Yeah. The problem is Lancashire's dozen district councils like Chorley, South Ribble, Preston, Fylde, and they wouldn't be part of this formal setup. So most of those local authorities are keeping their powder dry, but 2 of them have broken ranks. Paul Foster's the Labour leader of South Ribble Borough Council. He's condemned what he describes as a breach of trust by his county counterparts, while Preston City Council's leader, Matthew Brown's even been more attacking than that. He's questioned what benefits Preston will get if they haven't got a seat at the top table. Now, there's a phrase that stood out for me in the Lancashire Evening Post article. I thought it was a really good one. He said, the county has only been able to progress at the speed of the most circumspect of its constituent parts. Wow. That's the problem.
Who said that?
It was written by the journalist for the Lancashire Evening Post, whose name remains nameless because I didn't write it down. That's the problem with Lancashire. You've got such a fragmented county that they can't agree on it. And I don't think they ever will. What's your view?
Yeah, when I first saw the news that Lancashire County Council was ready to talk terms, which is the headline I used on the business desk, I must admit I was a little frisson of surprise, because if there's one thing that Lancashire politicians can always be relied upon to do, it's to think small and think parochial. So it seemed to me it was a rare outbreak of bigger thinking by Councillor Philip Williamson, the leader of Lancashire County Council, a Conservative, who strangely, for my political persuasion, I quite admire her, actually. I think she's quite sensible and pragmatic, and I always enjoy her contributions to debates in public life. I might be proved wrong. If anyone from Lancashire actually knows her and she's your county councillor, then put me right by all means. But yeah, right on cue, here come the townies.
Okay. And right on cue, we're going to our first interval. So one of the businesses I'm involved in is Proactive Progress. Proactive Progress is a monthly meeting of ambitious Northwest businesses who grow through collaboration. Every month, I hit my black book. We bring in a big name speaker and share experiences, challenges, and opportunities. If you're interested in joining Proactive Progress, contact me. Lots of methods to do that. LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever. Or my business partner, Paul Woods. If you want to grow your business, do it through Proactive Progress.
Welcome back to part 2 of the Northern Spin podcast. Before we go to our section, Anything to See Here, I want to discuss an amusing story that broke last week, Chris. You're going to have to give me some insight on this because I don't spend as much time on Twitter, maybe as you do. Yeah. But there was a Twitter account called The Secret Tory. It had nearly 200,000 followers, and there was a lot of speculation that it either belonged to you or an anonymous Conservative MP. But it turned out it belonged to a personal trainer from Yorkshire called Henry Morris. Now, the satirical account clearly is very staunchly anti-Conservative, and it developed a bit of a cult following. So how did he get exposed, and what do you think about it?
The thing is, I think on the one hand, this could be filed under the category tittle tattle, until you consider this story about his big reveal was reported by the BBC, pretty much all the mainstream media and social media. A lot of politicians got involved as well. And what it does is it underlines the power of the influencer and social media, especially and the ability to engage with young voters as well. And I've said it before, political parties ignore them at their peril. In 2022, this guy, who called himself the Secret Tory, he released a book, The Diary of a Secret Tory MP, almost, True Stories from the Heart of British Politics, which was widely endorsed by political commentators. Really, really interesting. He was of the view that he was about to be outed anyway, so he took the plunge. I mean, but you see the images of this guy. He's a personal trainer. He's got tattoos down both arms, etc., etc. He clearly is far removed from being a Tory as you could possibly get, but he got a lot of airtime and really interesting.
There's another Twitter account called The Week in Tory by a guy called Russ in Cheshire. And I think he spun a book out of it as well. And he basically just describes all the things the Tories have done in the course of a week. And that's very effective. You should, well, it might give you trauma, but it's certainly very informative. But it's very well argued.
But humour is such an effective medium.
Yeah, it is. It is. Right, what else have you got for me in the anything to see here?
We've got loads to rattle through, actually, so I'm not going to waste any time. So last week, can you believe Mark the year since the clean air zone was supposed to come into force across Greater Manchester? I drive down the M61 2 or 3 times a week, and there's a big sign up there about the clean air zone, except there isn't one. Daily charges for some of the vehicles which pollute the region's roads the most were set to start from May the 30th, 2022. Anything to see here? Because, and will Andy Burnham, do you think, ever have the courage of his convictions to bring it back to the table?
Well, he would. Well, we can ask him when he comes on the podcast, which he's agreed to do in July. So that's very exciting news. Now, we've spoken about this before, and we need probably just to rewind a little bit and think about the whole circumstances around the clean air zone. Andy, I think, would argue that the government required by law all local councils to come up with a plan in areas where the levels of nitrous oxide were dangerously high, right? That was a requirement. I think he's been quite vocal about that and introduced things like low emission buses, which are going to be based in Stockport, which is one of the great achievements for the authority that I used to work for, to secure the funding for green buses. But the whole point of it was that this was the government requiring councils to do that, not his great mission and his vision to penalise white van man, which is how it then got portrayed.
Yeah, I'd make a point as well that I'm not going to make any cheap shots at Andy Burnham in the sense that, like, my wife's got asthma, my youngest daughter's got asthma as well, so they use inhalers. Thousands of people are dying, every year from air pollution as well. But the danger is, I think, potentially this could become a real white elephant for Andy Burnham. And you see these signs that are covered up. Clearly, that costs money. And there are other towns and cities around the country, places like Bath, which I visited, Birmingham, Bradford, Bristol, Portsmouth, Sheffield. Even I don't really understand Sheffield. It just says when you go on the M1, slow down because we're going through an air zone and you have to drop your mileage to about 60 miles an hour in Tyneside. They've got clean air zones. So I just think it's one to watch. And it's definitely one I'm going to pick his brains on when he comes on the podcast.
Yeah, I think the idea was, why did Greater Manchester have a plan for a clean air zone that covered the whole of Greater Manchester, right? Coming into the whole of the city region, when you drive along the A6 past Lime Park and into High Lane, for instance, or, I don't know which point down the M61, it suddenly becomes Greater Manchester as you head towards Bolton from Chorley. Whatever it is, that I think that was the issue, rather than maybe Manchester city centre, parts of Salford, Berry New Road, things like that, where the levels of nitrous oxide are particularly high. I think Andy's plan, therefore, underestimated the backlash, and the government's about face on the plan, when they basically turned against his plan that they came back with, I think then started getting him into some political hot water. The covered up signs, I agree. I think they're a bad look for him, as rightly or wrongly, they are associated with his leadership. The campaign against the clean air zone personalised it and made it, they called it the Burnham tax. It was effective. It was noisy. It was a bit Brexity in tone, if I'm honest. And I don't know if you've seen it, but there's these roundabout rebels as well in different parts of Greater Manchester protesting about all sorts of things. The clean air zone, 15-minute cities, vaccinations. It's a conflation of lots of different issues that's mobilised a very vocal and noisy group of people. But what it does do is it really calls into question the ability of any government, local, national, regional, city, whatever, to introduce measures that will hit people in the pockets, that are designed ultimately to change behaviour to protect the lungs of, your daughters, for instance.
Can I ask you a question? It's not something we've discussed, but I was just thinking as we were talking about it. So when the congestion charge was suggested in Manchester, 10 years ago, 12 years ago.
2008.
Yeah, and it was, Richard Leese was seen as the architect of that, wasn't he?
Was, yeah.
So he got demonised over that, didn't he? And you look at Andy Burnham's coming up with the idea of the clean air zone. And the way I see it is that Andy Burnham's a lot more likeable than Richard Leese, and he hasn't got a lot of critics in the media in the north. That's the way I see it. So even something like this, which I think looks like a white elephant for Andy Burnham, he's not getting a lot of flack, is he?
He does. If you look below the line on a lot of social media and you look on Facebook, there's people that I know that live in the sort of rural outposts of Greater Manchester who are quite angry about the clean air zone. And they were actually put off by the vociferousness of the campaign against it. And I know that it took up a lot of bandwidth in the very limited capacity that Andy Burnham's team have got. In dealing with it. And he required the council leaders, one of which I used to work for, he required rather a lot of backing from them to lean in and take some of the blows for him.
Going to carry on with Andy Burnham. He was in the news a lot last week.
Andy Burnham
and Sadiq Khan have appealed to the government not to scale back their plans for High Speed 2, alongside Manchester City Council leader, Councillor Bev Craig, who we're also trying to get on this podcast, and Camden Council leader, Councillor Georgia Gould, who we're not going to get on this podcast. The mayor's outlined the importance of a Manchester Piccadilly Underground station and that High Speed 2 that connects High Speed 2 with a London terminus at Euston, not 6 miles outside the city centre. I think that's quite important. Do you think there's much to see here?
Yeah, I think it is. And it is quite important. That it's always interesting when different politicians from different regions who usually stand up for their own region kind of make a national infrastructure play. The headline we used was build it once and do it right. I still don't understand for the life of me, to be honest, though, why HS2 wasn't built from the north downwards if its main reason and purpose is to benefit the north, not London. It very quickly becomes a bit of a funnel down which more and more power and wealth and talent drains down to London.
Final Andy Burnham one before we talk about the CBI. Over the weekend, I read a story of the first buses in Greater Manchester's newly locally controlled system have been handed over. There's a picture of Andy Burnham sitting behind the wheels of a bus. This is a huge step for Andy Burnham because as in September, the region will become the first area outside London to have a regulated bus system since privatisation in 1986. And I think that's, I mentioned before, I thought Andy Burnham would go down to London and sit in a Labour government. I'm not sure now. And a lot of it's to do with the bus system as well. Now, something you predicted a while ago is starting to come to pass. There's a big vote this week, actually. The scandal hit lobby group, the CBI, has revealed plans to cut jobs as it struggles with the fallout from allegations of rape and sexual assault against staff. I read an open letter today, which has been signed by 13 businesses. I think Siemens were one, saying that they hope the CBI doesn't fall on its sword and there's still a future for it. What do you think about that? And is there anything to see here?
There's definitely something to see here, yeah. So there's a big vote tomorrow, and I think
that's Tuesday for the benefit of that.
Yeah. It's Monday today. The big vote is on Tuesday. It's an interesting one. I think the other big thing that happened is the British Chambers of Commerce have started something called a New Business Council. We reported that on the business desk this morning, Monday. And I think that's a real shot across the bows of the CBI. I think the CBI is finished, Chris. Honestly, I can't see how it can recover from this. There's even talk about changing its name, changing its governance. How on earth they're going to get people to pay, businesses to pay the amount that they're asking of them to be ineffective? They just won't. They won't pay for the privilege of just being in a club that has no clout. And without access to ministers, without access to opposition politicians, without being able to go on international trade missions, there is no point to the CBI. And if the British Chambers of Commerce, which also includes a network of district chambers like Greater Manchester, now I'm led to believe that the Chambers of Commerce nationally is very patchy, right?
Yeah.
In Greater Manchester, it's run by a guy called Clive Memmott and his deputy, Chris Fletcher. They have a whole team. They deliver all sorts of different services, and they're real go-to people. I think they're credible, right? I'm not sure that's the case all over the country. And, a strong chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
I've got this feeling that the CBI are at the same moment that the News of the World were with the Millie Dowler phone hacking scandal. Wow. And you look at it and say, I'm not sure there's any way back. And once you have that conversation, then I'm not sure there is any way back.
Yeah, I've dealt with trade associations and business organisations all in my professional life. They have to be trusted and have authority. But why on earth will anyone ever take the CBI seriously again? Anyway, one for you, Chris. It's nearly a year since the rail strikes started. There was more disruption on Friday and Saturday, especially felt in Manchester, with supporters going down to the FA Cup final at Wembley, where City beat United, as predicted on this podcast.
Yeah.
By both of us.
Absolutely.
Although I think I said 2-0, didn't I?
Did I say 2-1?
3-1.
3-1. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I did check.
Yeah. City should have hammered them, actually.
Yeah, they should. Should have been all over by the counting. Also, there was 3 big concerts in Manchester over the weekend: the Arctic Monkeys, Elton John, and Coldplay. Yeah. And people had to crawl in by any different means to the city centre. So the train strikes, lots of disruption. What do you think's going on?
Well,
will they ever end?
We come at it from slightly different sides of the political spectrum in terms of strikes. I think Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT union, I think he's forced himself and the union into a corner. I really do. So he's seen as the face of the rail unions. But it's worth making a point, and it's a point that you've made to me, that the strike extends beyond the RMT union. There are sort of 2 disputes at play here, one of which has sort of been resolved. But from a public perspective situation, people just see rail strikes. As far as I can see, this latest rail strike is more about terms and conditions. The problem is, even a really good communicator like Mick Lynch, and he is, struggles to articulate his message across to a fed-up public who see these strike actions coinciding with major events. And they keep saying it wasn't the plan to coincide it with the Eurovision. It wasn't the plan to coincide it with the FA Cup. And they can make a legitimate point to say that throughout the course of the summer, there's always events on. But here's the point. The rail service is poor even on the days when there isn't any strike action. My wife, she's with me today. She caught a train last week from Piccadilly, and the train stopped because they didn't have a guard on board. Now, I don't care what happens. People are voting with their feet. I never use the trains because they are so unreliable. And I think this is the problem that the rail service are going to have. I also think it's the problem that, like Royal Mail have got. We're getting problems with Royal Mail where we were in the house. My wife was waiting for a delivery. We were in the house. Suddenly, the thing slipped through the door. You weren't in. We'll come back tomorrow to deliver it. And the service that's being provided is second rate. That's just my view, Michael. You might disagree.
No, well, what's to disagree with? You're stating facts from personal experience. I'm not going to dispute those facts. But I think one thing that does scream out from that, you don't use the trains anymore because the service is diabolical. That's not on Mick Lynch. That's actually on the very people that Mick Lynch is banging his head against a brick wall, trying to negotiate with. I don't want there to be train strikes. I wish they weren't happening. I wish the railways were better run. I wish the people working on them, who in my experience are routinely helpful, friendly and warm, lovely people who want to serve the public and get work satisfaction and get a fair deal for putting in a fair day's work. The disputes are between the unions and the RDG, the Rail Delivery Group, the body representing the train operators. And that remains at a stalemate. ASLEF, the other union, not Mick Lynch's union, rejected an offer of a 4% pay rise, which they called derisory. Their General Secretary, Mick Whelan. Why are all rail industry trade union leaders called Mick?
It's a great name for a union leader.
It is. Maybe I should have gone into that with mine. I used to be Mick, Anyway, it's a really... I think some of Mick Lynch's slightly communist rhetoric is a bit overblown from time to time and a bit cringe, if I'm honest. But the brass tacks of this dispute is it's a really, really badly run industry. I read a piece in one of the papers at the weekend. There's 2 private, I didn't know about this, it's a complete revelation to me, but there's a train company that run just a really single service from Hull to London. Painted blue, these trains, they've been running during the disputes with train drivers. They can't run when there's, the tracks are closed due to signalling and stuff like that. 37 quid for a return trip from Hull to London. It's a much more limited service. They've been able to offer good terms to their staff. They don't suffer strikes, even though they do negotiate with the same trade unions. And there's something about the train operating companies that's fundamentally broken, I think.
And this is going to be another attack line for the Conservatives with Labour. They're absolutely going to go after the Labour's association with the unions.
Yeah.
One more I want to pick you up on before we go to our manoeuvres. So Gordon Brown, the Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford, lost his wife very recently, very sad. Andy Burnham, who we've mentioned 93 times on this show today. Tracy Braben joined the Alliance for Radical Democratic Change in Edinburgh. I don't know who comes up with the names for these get-togethers, but I don't like the Alliance for Radical Democratic Change. They've called for more devolution and the abolishment of the House of Lords. I think if you've got Gordon Brown at an event like that, it gives it credibility. Anything to see here?
Yeah, definitely. I've signed up for it. I went onto the website. It seems like, I think the main focus of it is about a radical Scotland as part of the union. I think that's its tactical play. I think that's where Gordon Brown is on manoeuvres, and he's trying to find people in Scotland to back the union. People from England to back the union in an alliance of people who want to rewire the country and do it differently. So you take, a powerful and charismatic retail politician like Andy Burnham stood next to Gordon Brown. It's going to be better than the optics of Gordon Brown stood next to, David Cameron and George Osborne in the 2014 referendum, which really was a bit of a disaster, wasn't it? Long term for the Labour Party.
Do you not think, though, that, the fact that you're getting Northern MPs joining forces to discuss stuff in Scotland and the Welsh First Minister, I think the idea of independence in Scotland is so far removed at the moment.
I think they still have to win the argument, and Labour need to be on a trajectory of having a positive vision for Scotland that resonates with people who've still got that grievance, that Scotland is badly treated by the Westminster system. I remember speaking to Andy Burnham about this some time ago. He's been in contact with politicians like Anna Samwar, the Labour leader in Scotland, and, the potential Labour leaders of Edinburgh, Dundee and Scotland, and Edinburgh, Glasgow and Dundee councils, that actually the SNP is centralised and controlling. They're the problem. And I think it's spotted that moment of weakness for the SNP. That's where I think this is happening. Anyway, another one on Gordon Brown. He's been down on the Wirral recently. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
no.
He's supporting the battle by Wirral South MP Alison McGovern, whose constituency is going to be abolished, and she is standing to be the MP for Birkenhead, which is a neighbouring constituency, which I think her house where she lives in New Ferry is becoming part of that. So Gordon Brown launched her re-election campaign to be the Labour candidate from her house on the Wirral.
To be honest,
Alison's great. I'm a big supporter of her. Her and her husband, who I used to work with at Manchester Met University, really, really frighteningly clever people, and they both used to work for Gordon Brown.
Well, I can't see anybody other than Labour winning every single, parliamentary seat in the next general election in Liverpool.
But Chris, it's not about Labour winning it. This again comes back to the point about selection battles.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, right. Sorry. It's Ali might not get in Birkenhead because there'll be an alternative candidate that'll be supported by trade unions, and the local Labour Party is probably a lot more left wing than she is.
So that's really telling then. That's
what's going on there.
Going to talk on manoeuvres now.
Yeah.
So the first one we're going to go to is this group, a self-styled, I like that phrase, self-styled Tory growth group. So I just mentioned this event that we had in Edinburgh last week where Andy Burnham turned up. It was called the Alliance for Radical Democratic Change. The Conservatives, who aren't ones for thinking outside the box, have just called it the Tory growth group. I think they're all on manoeuvres. So they're basically a group of about 50 MPs and 4 ex-ministers. They've made some headlines last week. They've called for a ban on inheritance tax, Liz 7 weeks trust, and the Daily Telegraph are pushing for it. It's worth explaining a bit of background about inheritance tax, because with the best will in the world, I'm not second guessing you or me, we're unlikely to be in that category. It's aimed at the super rich. Inheritance tax is paid when a person's estate is worth more than £325,000 when they die.
Maybe. I've just been on the calculations.
Okay. And they do leave everything above the threshold to their spouse, civil partner, charity, or a community amateur sports club. So inheritance tax applies to a small number of very wealthy people. They think, I read a piece, I think Dan Needle did a lot of stuff over the weekend, the tax expert, talking about the top 7%. Most of us would see no benefit from scrapping it, but the super wealthy Tory voters would. And that's the suggestion is that would give them an advantage over Lib Dems, especially in the southern seats where it's quite, closely fought. What do you think? Are they on manoeuvres?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. What about your attempt to be a Conservative? Have you been doing any more reading that I suggested you do?
No. And the thing is, you see, and you made a point in the first part of the show, which I agreed with again. You said the problem we've got is there are only 2 major parties. Now, let's say you've got the Lib Dems, that's 3. But really, there should be a far left for the Socialists in the Labour Party, and there should be a far right for the Conservatives as well. There isn't one group, there isn't one Conservative party, it's a group of fragmented parties. And I think the Tory growth group and these 50 MPs who are at one side of the spectrum, they should have their own party.
Yes.
Who else have you got on manoeuvres?
Come on, Tories, fragment.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Rachel Reeves, actually. She's a Leeds MP. So the New Statesman, my weekly magazine of choice, which I'm more than happy to donate my copies to you once I've read them and discarded them on their way to the recycling. They could be recycled in Chorley instead of Stockport.
Yeah, I'd read them.
So anyway, the New Statesman did a list of the most important people on the left. And Rachel Reeves was number 1, ahead of Keir Starmer. Andy Burnham was 12th, by the way. Yes. No item on this podcast this week is complete without a reference to the King of the North. So she's been in the US. She's been meeting more business leaders. She's a serious thinker, and she understands the British psyche and the importance of aspiration more than any other Labour politician, I think. So much of Labour's thinking is about how 2 different types of people might perceive the parties at the next election. And I'll summarise them really briefly. Deano and Mavis, right? So Deano, he lives in a new build in Buckshaw Village. He works in sales. He has a German car, family, holidays, ambition. His mortgage and his other borrowing costs have gone up. He's been nudged into a higher tax bracket when he hits his bonus. His job is probably quite insecure because he's not been hitting his bonus quite as much. His disposable income is squeezed. So he's not particularly bothered about things like transgender issues or even racism and stuff like that. He thinks, whatever. He has mates in the forces, so he's probably got a Help for Heroes sticker in his car as well. He's probably quite patriotic. Mavis, on the other hand, stands for middle-aged volatile insurgents. They're people in their 30s and 50s, university educated, environmentally woke, if you want to use that phrase, liberal, professional, educated. They absolutely hate Brexit. They aren't conservative because they don't see that the Conservatives give them anything to conserve. You know, they've not necessarily built up any equity in the way that people in their 70s want to protect the British way of life or stop being overrun by immigrants or change or anything like that. Now, balancing these 2 groups is tricky. And I think Rachel Reeves speaks to both of them really effectively at the same time. And I have to give due credit for some really interesting pieces that I read in the last few days. One by Andy Marr in the New Statesman about Mavis, and Tom McTague in a website called Unheard, who described the Deano of this world. I mean, I think these demographic groups and how political parties align around them is really, really interesting. And I think that's, if you look below the surface, if we want to give people insights on this podcast and groups of people in the North, then I think that's been really, really, it's quite interesting and well worth delving into a bit more in future. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think if you look at what Boris Johnson did in 2019, they identified a disenfranchised red wall voter who was teed off with the Labour Party and said, we're going to go after you. Now, I don't know what you call that voter. It's somewhere between Deano and Mavis. Let's call him...
It was working to man.
Yeah, working to man. Yeah. But they had a really clear message. I think the mistake that the Labour Party would make is to identify one target audience, because there isn't.
That's right. Yeah.
Because it's geographical.
Exactly.
So
exactly my point.
I like Rachel Reeves a lot. I think she's got a good sense of humour. She comes across well, self-deprecating. I like West Streeting as well. I think the problem is, I think the talent pool in the shadow cabinet, Johnny Reynolds is doing a good job. Angela Rayner's doing a good job. But I think if you go much further down...
What do you think of Lisa Nandy? Do you like her?
I think she's doing a decent job. I think she's doing a decent job, as opposed to where I say Rachel Reeves and West Streeting. I see them as secretaries of state because they're talking about the next battle. I think they're serious politicians and they get their briefs as well. One of the problems that the Conservative Party have got is they keep changing secretaries of state. So you've got 5 or 6 foreign secretaries, 5 or 6 chancellors in a very short period of time. Rachel Reeves and West Streeting, I don't know how long they've been in their shadow briefs, but it feels like a long time. And the work they're doing now, going over to the US, speaking to politicians in the US, you know, in West Streeting's case, taking on the unions now, that all augurs well. Yeah. Hopefully, we'll start hearing some policies from them soon as well.
I think they've got plenty of policies, Chris, as you well know. And on that note, we're going to go to an interval. I've always believed that a vibrant media sits at the heart of any community, and the business community is no different. So if you're in business, then thebusinessdesk.com is for you. We're up with the lark every morning to bring you the day's business news. We have regular events, credible news, and lots and lots of other events to bring people in the business community together. So log on now, thebusinessdesk.com, for all your regional news. Welcome back to part 3 of the Northern Spin podcast. We call this the fun bit, where I try and make Chris a little bit more northern, but also sometimes a few business stories creep in. So there's a few that broke last week. EG from Blackburn, the Issa brothers, sold a lot of their assets to Asda, which they also own. And really it was about keeping their Asda's debt under control, and EG's debt's under control. It's the most indebted conglomerate of businesses I've ever come across. Decra, a pharmaceuticals business in Cheshire, got sold, the biggest private equity deal this year. And then, Chris, we've seen the demise of the vehicle data company, Wejo.
It's not looking good for Wejo. We are hoping that it's not the complete death of Wejo as well. It's worth making that point. Yeah, I'm going to give a little bit of background to that. So Wejo was founded by a petrolhead called Richard Barlow in 2014. Genuinely nice guy. I asked him to speak at a little event I was organising during COVID. He gave an hour of his time. He's just a top quality guy. Big fan of F1 racing. What he realised is that F1 relies on data, and to the nth degree. And he realised there was nothing in business to collect data from cars that you and I might drive. So Wejo was born. It stands for We and Journey. So Barlow is a really hard worker. He travelled around the world. He visited the east coast of the US, like places like Detroit, where the car industry is based, no fewer than 43 times before he agreed this world-changing deal with General Motors in 2018 when they took a 35% stake in Wejo. The deal was signed on a napkin in a restaurant. Now, more than 13 million vehicles on the platform, and investors threw lots of money at Wejo. Their valuation soared. They would know, if they were looking at your car, if you were listening to Magic Gold or whatever it was, they would know. He explained to me, he said, if there was a traffic junction in Manchester where there were lots of potholes, they can identify where cars are damaging their suspensions, and then they can go to the local authority and they can go, this junction on First Avenue needs to be repaired because we've got a problem. So that was absolute gold dust to insurance companies, to local authorities. Everybody loved them, and that's the reason why people were throwing money at them. And as I mentioned, 13 million vehicles were regularly on their platform. The problem was this: Silicon Valley Bank, the demise of Silicon Valley Bank, the wider general economic malaise, the problems with Ukraine, energy prices, all those things conspired to spook the market, and that really had a massive effect on Wejo, which went on the American Stock Exchange, the Nasdaq. Wejo's growth was all predicated on being able to raise money because they were loss making. They were talking about, narrowing the losses and becoming break even possibly in 2024. The problem is Wejo generated income of $8.4 million in 2022. At the same time, they lost $159 million. Now, the investors took flight and said, you know what? We don't want to invest in a high growth, loss-making tech company like Wejo, and they basically pulled the plug. And that's the reason why Wejo announced their intention to appoint administrators, a local firm of administrators as well. Bad day for the Northwest, bad day for the UK tech sector generally. I mean, I don't know what you think, Michael, but I did a video on it. I don't know if you saw it. I did a video outside Wejo's offices. It went down really well. You should try it.
Where did you get the idea to do that?
Got it from you, Michael, as you know.
Well, I'm more concerned about jobs in the tech centre. Manchester's really in particular, because it's a Manchester headquarter business based in the ABC building, the same building as Open Money. I just hope people are all right for jobs. And it's good to see that Manchester Digital, the trade association that looks after tech companies in this city, their managing director, Katie Gallagher, has thrown her behind all efforts to find jobs for people and offer us a broken house.
I think the problem with stories like this, though, is that companies, I spoke to somebody who'd worked at Wejo, had been on holiday when he found out the second to last day of his holiday, and he's not being paid this month.
No, it's terrible.
And that's the suddenness of it.
Really sucks, stuff like that, doesn't it? Anyway, what else is going on?
Right, we're going to talk about music, aren't we?
Oh, indeed. So we both correctly predicted the result of the FA Cup final.
12 seconds. I
know. Yeah, I swore at that point. Stood up and went, It's the end of the month, so I revealed the winner of my Lunch of the Month, the Instagram thing that I do. The winner was Cambodia in Stockport's Produce Hall. I took my friend Nick, who loves Asian food and used to live in Southeast Asia, and he gave a big tick to the Cambodian fish curry, the sriracha cauliflower, and the wings and spring rolls. I did another story about an independent clothes shop in Manchester shutting up shop. Fear not though, Chris, it's not Slater's menswear, it's Lanigan and Hume. Following the trail of Oi Polloi and Whipples in putting the closed sign up. But Phil Lanigan is upping sticks and moving his business closer to the epicentre of Cheshire's Golden Triangle in Knutsford, even though he lives himself in Castlefield. It's a casualty, he said, of the working from home culture and the damage that that's doing to the city centre, which I think is a really interesting issue that affects lots of northern cities where professional people work during the week, very much like this one. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's a harder profession than being an independent clothes shop. I think you've not got the buying power, you've not got the marketing spend of the bigger brands as well. It definitely concert season, isn't it? I noticed Jen Williams posted that if you live in Manchester on a good breeze, you can hear loads of concerts from your back garden as well.
Yes, all at the same time.
I had a friend go to the Coldplay concert at the Etihad last week and said it was brilliant.
I'm sure you did, Chris. I'm sure you did.
I did.
Coldplay. Do you like Coldplay?
I don't like him. No, I'm not a fan of him.
Okay.
But the guy who went, he's not a fan of him. He said, what a brilliant live act.
Fine, good. I saw them a few years ago. I thought they were very capable, but it's not really my sort of thing. There's an exhibition on at the Refuge in Manchester by Rick Kelly, a really great photographer and listener to my music radio show. He had a launch for his new exhibition at the Refuge. It's well worth checking out. Beautiful, fantastic picture of Amy Winehouse that he took. He also praised my Insta posting skills, something I'm quite good at. Less said, however, about my LinkedIn formatting game, which we'll move swiftly on. What else? I missed the WIT bands marching, which I sometimes have been to in the past. They have these bands that march in places like Oldham, Glossop, and all of the different towns in the constellation around Tameside. They have marching bands. It's great.
Well, if you want to catch up with what happened there, all you need to do is look at the Twitter account of Stockport MP Nav Mishra.
Oh, did he go?
Well, I mean, I assume he did. I mean, I'm just thinking, actually, I'm touching on a nerve again. Are you still blocked?
I am still blocked, yeah. I'm
not blocked, actually. And just a serious thing that Nav Mishra posted at the weekend. He mentioned it was the 56th anniversary of the Stockport air disaster, which I knew nothing about. June the 4th, 1967, a plane packed with holidaymakers crashed into wasteland near Stockport town centre, killing 72 of the 84 passengers on board. And for somebody like myself who was born 5 years after that, I never knew.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's a whole little memorial to it just off Stockport town centre, in an area where they've now building some new houses. But yeah, it's big thing in Stockport, that. Anyway, what else have you been up to?
Well, I spotted a new TV programme. I stumbled across it on ITVX. It's called Vincent with Ray Winston. I don't know if you've seen it. And that lady is also in Scott and Bailey. Suranne Jones. Yeah. It's 2005. It's all filmed around Manchester.
Oh, wow.
And if you like Manchester, you see how Manchester's changed just by watching it. Now, I had a really surreal experience last week. So I've been a journalist for 31 years. I found myself the subject of the story when I fronted a skin cancer campaign after my own experience. Incidentally, I'm actually going to climb back under a rock fairly soon because I'm not comfortable talking about personal stuff. I'm not. But I did it because I wanted to raise awareness about it. BBC Northwest Tonight picked up on it and they turned it into a news story which went onto the BBC's website.
Great.
And it was one of the best read stories on the BBC. I'm getting messages from people saying, blimey, Chris, are you all right? And I said, yeah, absolutely, but my modelling career's dried up. TV recommendations, I watched another programme. Just started a new series called Changing Ends. It's a semi-autobiographical sitcom about Alan Carr's childhood in Northampton. His dad is the football coach. It's not...
Graham Carr.
Graham Carr. He was at Newcastle as well. The show belongs to the young Alan Carr. I think he's only 11. This lad called Oliver Savell. He is absolutely amazing. As good a performance as I've seen by a young actor. Just brilliant. You must see it.
Fantastic. Yeah, right. Well, that's all for episode 5 of season 4 of Northern Spin. If you want to join FI Real Estate Management and sponsor the podcast, please get in touch. We're on Apple Podcasts, so please review us. Give us feedback on Spotify. Don't forget to press the subscribe button. Follow us on Twitter at Northern_Spin1 or watch us on YouTube. Thank you, as ever, to What Media for recording this podcast. Special mention to Elliot Taylor for providing the music. My name is Michael Taylor.
and normal service has been resumed. My name is Happy Clappy Chris Maguire.